Now, when we say minorities, perhaps so, but the point about it is that we're talking about different kinds of minorities.
Exactly.
Maybe the Muslims were certainly part of that. The Sikhs, for example, could have been. The Christians could have been. Particularly, I think Nehru was very keen on what is called a centralized structure, because he saw that the ills of India, of Indian society, were not really so much cultural. A lot of things which were associated with UP were very distinct, so they wanted to rid UP of that. They wanted to have a much more Sanskritized state. They were very keen on abolishing cow slaughter. They were introducing the Nagari script. All of these things were there, and they were a constant issue, and these cultural things were in a sense much more pronounced.
To restore India to what we commonly say the dream of the nation that was there at the time of independence.
Now, if the government is all it's interested in is actually giving cash handouts, because that's increasingly seems to be the model.
Right.
The point is that there is no accountability.
Hello and welcome to the Federal. You are watching Conversations with Nilanjan. During the recent youth and students' protest in Delhi and across the country, there was one argument which was constantly made by the protesters, that they shall not allow this protest to become a Hindu-Muslim conflict like there has been there in the past 12 years, ever since Prime Minister Narendra Modi became Prime Minister, and the government and the BJP pushed a majoritarian agenda on the national political plate. We will be talking about majoritarianism today. The reason why we would be able to talk about this exclusively is because we are discussing a book which has recently come out. This is a wonderful book, Heartland Rising, the Making of Majoritarian India, and we shall be talking about this book with the author, Mr. Javed Gaya, who is here in the studio with us. Javed Gaya has been a lawyer from Mumbai. He is specialized in commercial arbitration law, which is completely a different kind of a subject from the book that we are talking about. But this is the beauty of India, that it provides opportunity for somebody being professionally engaged with one subject and writing deep analysis on something which is actually troubling all of India at the moment. It is this book which I spoke about, Majoritarian India. It's a very provocative political, historical and a legal critique of Indian democracy. That is the way I would like to describe the book to my viewers. Now, let me ask you, Javed Saab, that is it right to say that at the core of your book is the argument that the Constituent Assembly made a crucial error in the 1940s, when the Constitution was being done up, after, the cabinet mission and all that, the processes had started, that the political architecture of the country after independence was built around the idea of individual liberty, or to put it specifically, one person, one vote, and not ensuring meaningful structural representation to minorities within a robust federal framework. Would you say that this is one of the central?
Absolutely. I think this is the most central. That's the central argument here. And the point I think I would like to make is that the Constituent Assembly was faced with a choice, as I put it, between liberty, that is a one man, one vote sort of situation where people where everyone has access to the franchise, to the ballot box, as it were, and or a situation where that liberty is somewhat maybe compromised or whatever, but in favor of equality, which is the notion that people should have a representation. Particularly now, when we say minorities, perhaps so, but the point about it is that we're talking about different kinds of minorities. Maybe the Muslims were certainly part of that. The Sikhs, for example, could have been. The Christians could have been. The scheduled tribes and the Dalits, were to some extent, of course, certain rights were given to them.
And also minorities, not just on the basis of religious identity.
Correct.
Linguistic, ethnic,
regional, correct.
Yes.
And ultimately the idea really was, at the crux of it, was that were we going to be a unitary society where we had essentially, like, for example, European states, where they would have a very homogeneous culture and they would have a very centralized system? Or where were we going to be a more federal structure, where we would allow for difference, where we would allow for different linguistic things and so on and so forth? I mean, the point was that what kind of India were we actually going to be? And that, I think the problem was that essentially a particular part of the Congress, particularly I think Nehru, was very keen on what is called a centralized structure, because he saw that the ills of India, of Indian society, were not really so much cultural. They were economic, in the sense that what he saw and he saw things like central planning to be the sort of panacea for
the state of the Indian economy.
For the state of the Indian economy. So, and also partly you also had Ambedkar, because Ambedkar was very conscious of the fact that he didn't have much time for the rural areas and those kind, village India, called them cesspools of inequity and whatever. He saw a very centralized system of like-minded people who would be able to impose a new social norms on the rest of the country. And he saw that in a very centralized area. And then, of course, you had the Hindu right, because, I mean, what you also have to remember is the Hindu right have traditionally, I mean, even if you look at, for example, the ideology of the RSS, they've never been keen on federalism at all.
No.
They've been very key, they have been very animated,
a centrally
imposed kind of thing, which is in a sense, and of course for them there was another point, which was for them was the centrality, particularly of UP, because UP was a very culturally significant part of India for them. It had a very high percentage of Brahmins, for example.
Even though the RSS did not originate from UP, came in there very late. Only in the 1930s do they start making some kind of inroad into UP and Bihar.
Bihar, indeed. In fact, before that, it was really the Arya Samaj.
Yes.
And of course, in collusion with a lot of the Brahmin culture, which was had people like, and of course personalities like Madan Mohan Malviya, who were part of the Hindu Mahasabha as well as being part of the Congress, because until I think 1940 you could have been both. So the point is, you had this very strong tradition of this Brahmanical this thing, who wanted to impose their notion, for example, Sanskrit, that whole kind of culture of Hindi, and also non-vegetarian, and vegetarianism, vegetarian food,
which is now come back, in a big way.
In a big way, correct.
You have in the month of Sawan, you have these yatras coming out where they want to sanitize the entire route. Shopkeepers who are selling food items to put the names of the owners on it, so that people from other religion do not,
transact
feed the pilgrims.
Feed the pilgrims.
They do not really act like pilgrims.
Indeed, and in fact, it all is premised on this notion of purity.
Yes,
that people should not be and what is disturbing is this, that I mean, I have no problem with people. For example, I'm nominally a Muslim, but I mean, I don't eat pork. Now, I don't eat pork for cultural reasons, whatever else. But for me, at the highest, it would be considered something of a taboo. And a taboo is something which basically involves myself. It doesn't involve, now, if you are eating pork, I have no issue with that, and the point is, but unfortunately, there is this idea of, which is rampant, at least at that time, and currently, unfortunately, today, that these things, that people should be prevented from doing things, which is really something which brings a degree of intolerance into the discourse, which really is very disturbing. You shouldn't dress like this. You shouldn't eat like this. You shouldn't, you shouldn't have relationships with certain people. This love jihad thing. There are all these things. Even now, for example, in the Uniform Civil Code, which they have brought in, for example, live-in relationships are targeted and stigmatized, and that they would have to be, registered, because the idea of registered. So
basically, to enable the state to keep their eyes and ears on such people who are deviant, within quotes, deviant. Is that the reason that they are?
I think so. I think it's also a question of trying to create a culture where people snoop on their neighbors, a kind of vigilante kind of thing, where you actually empower the wrong sort of people for the wrong purpose, in a sense that, the village busybody immediately becomes empowered.
The busybody and the bully in the street, they become very much, arms of the state.
Exactly.
Anyway, to come back, I must confess, that we have all grown up believing in this one person, one vote.
Yes.
And this idea, it struck me, while reading your book. This is the same time that the recent debate over delimitation has come up, and the fears of the southern states that they would be kind of become numerically, insignificant in after delimitation. That fear was there. But now the government seems to be saying, that basically to try to get the delimitation bill passed, to say that we are not going to change the proportion of the number of, seats which are there between various states. So UP's 180 will become 120, Bengal's 42 will become 63. That's the way that they are going about it, But yes, compromises are being made to that principle, so I must confess to that. But, suppose that there had been some kind of safeguards for the minorities of various kinds in the constitution, how would it have really changed the path that we have followed?
Well, I think
what would have been, an imaginary different kind of India?
I think the point is that, of course, this is all counterfactual because it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But basically, the way I look at it is this, that if you think about it, the two very big states of India, which were basically Punjab and Bengal, were, broadly speaking, not particularly communal. The fact of the matter is, if you discard in Punjab the riots, the partition riots, but before that,
in Bengal, right from the early 1940s, there were communal tensions.
There were communal tensions, but the point is that it was episodic in the sense that there was not it wasn't in the same way that it was in UP. UP was a society, the United Provinces that time, where you had a lot of issues between Hindu Muslims in a way that was bordering on constant on riots breaking out, etc., and other sorts of tensions. And you didn't have, and of course you had also, it was accentuated by the fact that you had a very high upper caste proportion, and they were very in a sense irked by the fact that a lot of the cultural the main cultural thing was largely Muslim. I mean, in the sense of the language and the the tehzeeb and the, and a lot of things which were associated with UP were very distinct. So they wanted to rid UP of that. They wanted to have a much more Sanskritized state. They were very keen on abolishing cow slaughter. They were introducing the Nagari script. All of these things were there, and they were a constant issue. And these cultural things were, in a sense, much more pronounced than they were in Punjab and Bengal. Because in Bengal, for example, you didn't have a problem in the things of language or culture or anything like that. Everyone spoke Bengali, I mean, in the same way also in Punjab. I mean, there was, of course, a lot of people wrote in Urdu and spoke in Urdu, but that covered all the communities. I mean, there was Punjab was more a tribal society, and secondly, the very important factor is that it wasn't as casteist a society as United Provinces and to some extent Bihar were. So basically, what happened was that when you actually neutered those two states, you reduced them to really very small versions. I mean, if you look at Punjab in post-partition.
Post-partition, Punjab became a very small Punjab.
Right.
Likewise, East Bengal or Bangladesh was much more than what West Bengal is today.
Correct. Absolutely right. So the point was that they were politically rendered insignificant.
And that gives rise to the cow belt, and as you point out in your book, that was the center of India's majoritarianism. It
was the center of India's majoritarianism, and it was buttressed by one very important factor, and that was this whole notion of this, because at least before partition, the Muslims comprised of almost, I think, nearly 25% of UP's population.
Right.
The point is that you had a solid 20% upper caste Hindu population, if you included the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and the mercantile communities, the Banyas and so on. You had more than 20% or whatever. And therefore, the point is, the idea was of trying to bring the lower castes into that fold, the Sanskritization formula. And so that formula itself created a lot of tensions with the Muslims, So the point was that, the point I'm making is that these cultural motives were very important in terms of the thing, which were not so important, frankly, in both Punjab and Bengal. Punjab and Bengal, economics mattered because, say, the Unionist Party, which was the dominant party pre-partition. And the point is that was a landlord party. And, and the point is there was a class uniformity.
And in Bengal, it was, of course, even in the 1940s, it was a fractured,
but there was a strong, pro land reform element, which was there. Which I think, in a sense, today you can even look at modern day Bangladesh and you can say that to some extent a lot of reforms which happened in the 40s and 50s, to some extent did assist in terms of women's empowerment and things like that, and literacy and so on, help those societies. But the point I'm making is that we actually elevated the cow belt. And the cow belt was now I think there's a lot of people confuse, for example, the issue of the RSS, of Vinayak Savarkar and various, that element from who were basically from Maharashtra. They were Brahmins from Maharashtra. They were not as significant, frankly, in the political movements at that time as, frankly, the Brahmins in UP. I mean, people like Malviya, people like Tandon, people like Pant, who were very, very central. Yes, absolutely. And I mean, like, for example, that's right. Who became head of the Congress party post the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. Because
and eventually, had a major ideological battle with Nehru and had to eventually step down.
Correct.
Worked on that.
And in fact, the point was that, and I make this point in my book, that the UP Congress was basically autonomous to, from Meru.
And would you go to the extent of saying that at the time when the nation was being conceptualized as independence was coming close, through the debates in the Constituent Assembly, the manner in which they were going about, the Constituent Assembly was debating centralization of UP and Bihar in conceptualizing the nation. What about Western and Southern India? Did they exist, or were they just mere rubber stamps?
I think what happened was that that the importance, because of the Congress. I mean, I think Gujarat to some extent was also important.
Yes,
because you had Sardar Patel was from Gujarat. Gandhi himself was from Gujarat. And prior to partition, Jinnah and Muhammad Ali Jinnah was from
land of what really started the national movement, actually became a people's movement. The Gandhi March.
With the Gandhi March, indeed. So in that sense, the point about but the issue of the RSS and the extent to which they were significant at that time, I'm not so sure they were as significant as they became later, for the simple reason that post partition, particularly in UP, you had a succession. I mean, Pant, for example, Govind Vallabh Pant, had a rather, how shall I put it, his view on Ayodhya.
Yes.
It was certainly very
his role is
questionable.
very questionable.
Questionable, exactly.
Nehru also tried to do as much to push him to act and get back on the secular path, but could not really.
No. And not only that, but also we also had a whole lot of law, a whole slew of laws which were passed, for example, on the business of cow slaughter.
Yes.
In UP. And of course, the actual aim for all these people was to have a national cow slaughter policy, which would have been a disaster.
Which is still being pursued.
Which is still being pursued. And I mean, we had, for example, in the 50s, and when Nehru was there were major riots. What we've seen, for example, recently in Jantar Mantar. I mean, we had something on that scale in 1966 when Mrs. Gandhi was in power.
But with a different
agenda. And that was an agenda
that was
of...
the majoritarian agenda.
Correct. But what I'm saying is, and this is the point which I think it bears thing, is that the thinking of the cow belt was very much regressive. Okay. I mean, it was concerned with certain things which were important. And and the trouble is that we are obsessed with this Western notions of left and right. And the point is that, how do you... Now, of course, we did have something like a Swatantra Party, which was... which
definitely
came up.
On the economic aspect, they were definitely...
On the economic aspect.
On the right side.
On the right side.
Even a bit on the cultural side.
Yes.
But maybe not as much as the Jansangh was those days.
No. I mean, the point about it was that you had the leadership was that time of Mr. Minu Masani, who was by and large, very secular.
Secular person.
And in fact, he was one of the people who, was very, and I mean, not only secular in terms of thing, but he was, for example, on his views on Kashmir, his views on women's entitlement, as a social liberal, were atypical. I mean, they were not widely held, and it was Bombay pass. But the problem is that the cow belt had the things which interested them were really things which had really little to do with the development of the country in the conventional sense, in a sense of an economic development and so on. They were really interested in the thing, and that applies whether it's to the Congress or it applies to the BJP or it applies, frankly, to the Lohiyite socialists. I mean, even, for example, someone like Lalu Prasad Yadav said something which no cowbell politician has put very clear, has explicitly. He said, I'm not interested in development.
No one says that.
Yeah, no one says that. Now, if they talk about development...
But then it's really not their priority. Their priority is essentially to wield power by using fairly moribund lines of division within society.
Whether it be casteist, whether it be communal.
Religion.
Yeah. And their obsession, of course, and this fixation with the cow is a big issue.
Big thing. Now, let's move on to another very important point, which is there in your book, and is also very much threatens, social peace in and tranquility within the country even today. That is the matter of personal laws.
Yes.
Now, after a fairly long drawn effort through the Constituent Assembly debates and later in Parliament, finally by mid 1950s we had the Hindu reform bills. They came into place. Hindu family laws came into place. But thereafter, nothing really happened on the Muslim side, for whatever be the reasons. So a political narrative was built that while you meaning the government, the Congress party, did reform Hindu laws because it was easy for you to reform Hindu laws, but you never touched the Muslim laws because they couldn't be reformed. So the same kind of debate comes up. There were secularists through the 50s, 60s and the 70s, even the 1980s, where universal civil code was unanimously supported by all secularists. But after it started being, became an issue for the BJP to demand uniform civil code, it started becoming a bit problematic because it also coincided with the rise of majoritarian forces with the Ram Janmabhoomi agitation. So when there is now a state after state uniform civil code laws being passed and the BJP at the center also giving hints that they may be moving in some kind of a national law if required, how do you view this entire issue of uniform civil code, the present contradictions, the necessity of it at one hand, but a political problem on the other hand?
Well, first of all, I'll just take a step back, as it were.
Yes, please.
One was the question of the circumstances which led to the reform of Hindu law in the 50s. Because the point I make is that, look, the condition of the Hindu wife was pretty dire at that time. Because of the caste system, because there were restrictions on who she could marry. She didn't have the right to marry out of her caste, for example, unless
out of a caste and widow, the problem of widows.
The problem of widows was there. There was no this thing, and also the problem of divorce, because Hindu law was a sacrament, and did not permit divorce. Now, the point about it is that, remember, in 1937. Jinnah had pushed through what they call the Sharia Act, which was an important thing, because it was the first time anyone's actually pushed through legislative agenda on something like a personal law. It was not considered to be whatever. But a lot of the things which the Muslim women at that time had, Hindu women did not have. The right, for example, for divorce, the right, for example, the business of sustenance as a widow, the issue of... And critically, for example, a Muslim woman would have a right in her father's estate on the father's death, because it would be half the brother, but it would be at least something. It wasn't nothing. So the point is, so therefore there was a difference in the position of the thing. Now, when you come to the point of the Uniform Civil Code, the problem was that you see. That the big problem I have always foreseen, and in the Uniform Civil Code, and this is also a reason why, in a sense, the state, even the current government, the current BJP, are not pushing it at a central level in the same way that you could imagine they would have. And that is for one very important reason, and that is the HUF. The Hindu Undivided Family. Because you see, the point is that has been, we are the only country in the world which taxes people which can where we tax family wealth, the HUF, which in a way leads to a situation where the government and the individuals are benefited. The individual are benefited because whatever wealth is spread out amongst a number of people. The question of when there's a dissolution, that becomes an event for major capital gains tax, whatever. Right. So the point is, there are various things, but basically the Vanchu committee, which was a very important committee, which was led by Justice Vanchu in 1971, was extremely critical of the Kopasni laws and the HUF, saying that this amounts to a big tax dodge. for the mercantile community. And this was also very important because remember that when the UCC was being thought of, there was a committee of fundamental rights, and that was headed by Sardar Patel. Sardar Patel was very clear that, look, this can't be, a UCC can't be part of any fundamental rights. So he consigned it to a directive principle. So it's not as if this was all being done out of concern for Muslims. The Muslims are not in the picture. The problem was that it was really being done to basically consolidate and protect the Kopasni system of inheritance and of rights. And of course, remember, there was a very patriarchal angle to it, because it was only in 2005 that the Hindu woman got any right, in this thing. And remember that Ambedkar tried to push through his legislation in 1951, and that had equal rights in Kopasni property for the Hindu women. And that's the reason it was scuppered, because the point is that the Hindu right were not comfortable with the idea of equality of that.
Yes.
So even when at the time, if you think about it, when you had Shah Banu, which was a big issue in the 80s, which
gave the BJP and the RSS the moral handle to actually push for the Ram temple issue.
Correct. The point about the thing is that at the same time, the Hindu right were sort of the crocodile tears, for the right for the Muslim woman. The point was that at that time, their own sisters and wives and all that would have no rights in terms of property within the matrix of the HUF. So it was only until the Supreme Court intervention in 2005 that altered that. So, and this, of course, all this happened in the 80s. So what I'm saying is that we have a situation that really it was the issue of the and that is also a reason why the government may not be pressing for a central legislation and are doing it at a state level, because basically the Income Tax Act is a central statute.
Yes.
And the HUF finds protection in the central statute. So if they pass a uniform civil code, the question of Kopasni property comes up, and they have no excuse that we can't do it because the Income Tax Act is a central statute. Because
so it's going to be in conflict with the
precisely,
UCC. So
that's going to be an issue. Yeah. So the problem basically is that they're just rolling out these state things because effectively it means that it serves their purpose of attacking Muslims without touching the enormous tax benefits and otherwise benefits to the Hindu mercantile class, which the HUF affords them.
Okay. Now, there is one issue which we need to talk about, is that since 2014, when the BJP secured an absolute majority and Prime Minister Narendra Modi assumed office, So since then, there has been a debate between various people, various analysts, that 2014 in a way represents that point of rupture from India's past. That things really started becoming more majoritarian, that a lot of preparatory work may have been done previously, but India did not turn majoritarian the way it has. Based on your historical mapping of India and the perspective with which you have looked at the emergence of majoritarianism, how do you look at this, or rather, let me put it this way, on which side of the debate of even since 2014, where do you stand?
Well, I think definitely that there has been a toxicity introduced into our political system post 2014. I mean, there's no question that you find that, for example, there's been a lot of brainwashing. There's been the control of the media, which is really revolves around this bipolarity of Hindu-Muslim
institutional
erosion. That has all happened, and it's
including the judiciary.
Absolutely, including the judiciary, no doubt. But the point about it is that this is the thing which I do like to also emphasize, is the fact that Modi didn't come out of nowhere.
Right.
The point is that there was an existing...
2002 was justified because of a lot that had happened in
That's
the
right.
2 decades prior to that.
Correct. And the fact is that the BJP itself, I mean, I will say this, that Vajpayee and like that were, and to a lesser extent, perhaps Advani, were people who, whatever they were people who had experienced, the period during the emergency where they were locked up and whatever, and essentially did not want a sort of authoritarian state, in the way they were basically looking at having as kind of a soft Hindutva type of thing, without affecting constitutional liberties in the way that it has been done. Now the problem was that you see, I think they had no understanding of what I call fascism, because ultimately the point is that what we see, I suppose,
now,
today is very much in line with
a different kind of fascism from what was seen
absolutely
in Europe. It's
in
a
Europe,
different form.
it's a bit different. But the point about it is that, but remember also in Europe you had a situation where, I mean, let's be frank, I mean, Hitler did win his election. He had elections.
Yes.
But the point about it is that but none of the other securities were there. I mean, of course, the treatment of the minorities was appalling. You had the Holocaust and all that. But the point about it is that there was some attempt at legitimacy through elections.
Right.
And that's the argument I make, also against, one man, one vote, because it's not as if one man, one vote leads to, makes everything correct. Because ultimately what we want is a political society. To have a political society, you can't have a society where the winner takes all. Right. Because if the winner takes all, the other person is left with nothing.
There is also a problem with, the first past the post system,
Totally. Absolutely.
That's a different issue. We'll talk about it at a different
yes,
point.
No, that deserves
one last question to you,
yes.
before we wind up this
yes.
Delightful conversation. I wish we could go on
yes.
much longer. Your book is a diagnosis
yes.
of what all is wrong. It is also a warning that what worse things can happen.
Correct.
At the point that we are now, which is in the month of August in the year 2026, what, according to you, can be really done to restore India to what we commonly say, the dream of the nation that was there at the time of independence?
Well, I think one important factor which has happened just recently and in the last month was really the fact of the resignation of the education minister. Because what I put forward, in fact, it's in my epilogue, which is unfortunately a bit depressing, because I basically argue that, look, that if you are not, ultimately government has certain things to do. It has education, it has health, it is concerned about safety, it is concerned about, for example, pollution, it is concerned about law and order. Now, those things are uniquely government can do. The government cannot outsource those things to other people. Now, if the government is all it's interested in is actually giving cash handouts, because that's increasingly seems to be the model.
Right.
The point is that there is no accountability. Now, the great thing about the resignation of the education minister is that it was an example of accountability for the first time.
And that has become part of the national agenda pressed on by youngsters and students.
Correct. Absolutely. And the problem is that you see with the majoritarian agenda, and this is why I say that it's not good for the majority, is that you create these what you call it, demons. Whether it be the Muslims or, for example, Donald Trump talks about trans people and,
yes.
all sorts of things. There's basically distractions, is that you end up in a situation where the government increasingly has no responsibility or accountability for the common people. So the point is, everyone suffers. It's not just the minorities. Today, if you have to breathe the air of Delhi, in the winter,
polluted air,
you have to understand. Now, Shanghai got rid of it in 10 years. They took a policy.
Delhi doesn't seem to be taking nobody's interested.
Nobody's interested. And because the point is, if you have a Hindu-Muslim thing, if you have all these distractions...
So one of the remarkable points which was made by one of the speakers during the Cockroach Janata Party-led protest was that this is not a Hindu-Muslim thing. We have had enough of it. Okay. We are going to talk about real issues which affect the bread and butter of the youth, of the young people.
That's right.
People like you and me, the major part of our life is over. It's the youngsters who are now, calling the shots and possibly also pressing the government. We do not know how things are going to roll out, but you feel that accountability being brought in. Any other thing that you think should be done so that your diagnosis and the warning, we can make take a reverse gear and go back?
Well, certainly accountability is a key thing, and I think the point is the government has to take seriously what it has been elected to do. I mean, the problem is that none of the issues which are central to any government, I'm talking not just about this government or whatever, any government, they have to start addressing those issues. I mean, what law and order is in a mess here, I mean, in terms of our judicial, I'm a lawyer, I can tell you, the judicial system. The
judiciary
has to be just above Gabon, for example.
Judiciary at times, acts like the executive, as part of the political executive.
Exactly.
So those are the kind of steps.
The kind of issues, and then issues of education are the amount of money we spend on education as a percentage of GDP has collapsed.
Low.
It's collapsed.
Yes.
I mean, in 2013, it was something like 5.4%. Today, it's 2.5%. So the point is that we are lagging behind, and ultimately, we want to grow into a middle level, into a, say, $5,000 per capita society, which is, within a certain period of time. We have to spend money on education and health.
That's right.
That is, otherwise we're not being taken seriously.
Maybe the government can make a start by cutting down the amount of money that it spends on publicity.
Oh, totally. I mean, the amount of money it spends on publicity is extraordinary. I mean, and the point is that they just need to get their act in order in terms of as I said, education and education, health, environment, and it needs to see development.
And generate jobs.
Absolutely. I mean, for example, the business on the SMEs,
yes.
Particularly demonetization, particularly the introduction of the GST, a very complicated GST with many layers, has really crippled the SMEs, which generate employment. Much more so than this thing. And now we're living in a world increasingly of AI and robotics.
That's right.
So the point is, it's going to get much, much worse.
So well said. I think that in the time that this government has left till the next parliamentary elections, let us hope that this government does the job that it has to do.
Indeed.
And not allow the political wing of the government to pursue majoritarianism, which you say has brought the country to this sad state. Thank you very much, and congratulations on a very deeply researched and lucidly written book, a very communicative text. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the interview. Thank you.
Thank you.